Hello! This is Booty Bopper, and today we're going to be taking a critical look at a specific aspect of how the Fire Emblem series handles balance. Fire Emblem has done a lot throughout its 30-year history to balance its gameplay, and despite endless changes, there are certain trends that run throughout the series. Some examples of this include Wyvern Riders being overpowered or Armor Knights being terrible. Another trend, and the one we'll be looking at today, is that the Jagens are often among the most overpowered units in each game. For new players or people unfamiliar with fan terms, a Jagen is an early game character that is incredibly powerful and usually miles ahead of the rest of the playable cast in terms of gameplay utility. Popular characters that fit this archetype are Blazing Blade Marcus, Path of Radiance Titania, Awakening Frederick, and of course, the OG Jagen from Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light and its remake Shadow Dragon. In most current discussions of Fire Emblem, it is generally understood that Jagens are among the best units in each game. However, this was not always the case. The first Fire Emblem game I played was Sacred Stones, and the first piece of advice I was given going in was to bench Seth and to never use him. Anyone who's played Sacred Stones knows that this is ridiculous advice because Seth massacres that entire game. When Awakening came out, everyone talked about how Frederick was a beginner's trap because he steals experience. I internalized these tips so much that when I had a friend play Radiant Dawn, I had him avoid all combat with Soth and even had him avoid using characters like Nolan because his high base level slightly lowered his EXP gain. It was an absolutely miserable experience, and now I can't imagine trying to play Radiant Dawn early game without Soth, Nolan, Taronio, and so on. Much of this advice came from the simplified view that many players, including myself, had on characters back then. Oftentimes we looked at growth rates and nothing else. The idea of the Jagen is that they are a very powerful character at the start, and they fall off because their level ups won't be as good as other characters. Nowadays, most people know the Jagens are ridiculously good because there are a lot more to characters than just growth rates. You have base stats, weapon ranks, movement, and utility skills like rescuing or the ability to move after certain actions. So, today I want to look at how Intelligent Systems has balanced Jagens throughout the series, and what steps I think can be taken to better balance Jagens so that they don't remain as broken as they almost always have been. The first Jagen is, well, Jagen from Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light on the Famicom. Jagen joins in Chapter 1 and jumps out as the most badass dude you've ever seen. Along with his shoulder spikes, he has incredible bulk with 20 HP and 9 defense, and he dishes out major damage with his Silver Lance. Between that weapon and his 7 strength, Jagen has 19 attack power and massacres basically everything. However, the game itself tells you to let other characters get kills, and that if you over-rely on Jagen, you will struggle in the long run. If you took one look at Jagen's growth rates, you would be horrified. He has 10% in HP, strength, and speed, and a big, fat 0% growth in luck, defense, resistance, and weapon level. That seems awful, because it is, but there are a couple of caveats to consider here. First, every single character in the game has a 0% resistance growth, and every character has 0 base resistance except for Gato, the final character in the game. So the 0 in resistance is a wash. His weapon level growth of 0% also doesn't matter much. In the first 3 Fire Emblem games, weapon level was a stat you leveled up rather than built over time by using weapons. Jagen's base 10 weapon rank means that he can use every sword and lance in the game at base except for the Gradavis. While losing out on the Gradavis sucks, that weapon doesn't come until the game is nearly over, and until then Jagen can get big hits with Silver Lances, Silver Swords, Killing Edges, Levin Swords, Horse Slayers, and Worm Slayers with 0 investment. At 9 base defense, the first good character you get that exceeds that is Minerva, who joins in Chapter 10. Jagen's strength of 7, though, is not nearly as impressive, as many early game characters, including the Cavalier Kain, who joins alongside him, either match or exceed him. Of course, he's able to make up for this by having exclusive access to silver weapons for a while, especially in specific contexts like 0% growth runs. Where he begins to fall off very quickly is speed. His base speed of 8 is good, but it quickly gets outclassed, and his low growth means that his time doubling enemies is very limited. Giving Jagens long-term speed problems is a common trick to balance them, but as we'll see with later units like Binding Blade Marcus and Frederick, it often doesn't really matter all that much. Stat-wise, Jagen is one of the most well-balanced in the series because his growths are so egregiously bad. However, what keeps him from really falling off is a trait that we've yet to mention: his movement. With 10 movement at base, Jagen will be your most mobile unit for a long time. With how weak enemies are in Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, it's easy to run Jagen in with a Javelin or Levin Sword and have him destroy groups of scrubs throughout large portions of the game. Because of his mobility, he's an okay candidate for the speed ring, which gives a massive +6 boost to his speed. Jagen's mobility and really good 1-2 range with javelins and levin swords are presenting a problem that much of the Fire Emblem series has not balanced with its Jagens. Their mobility combined with access to great weapons makes them ridiculously silly, perhaps much longer than Intelligent Systems actually intends them to be. It's also worth noting that a future method of balancing Jagens, the reduced EXP yield of pre-promoted units, does not exist in Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light and won't exist until Thracia 776. Still, because his growths are so cartoonishly bad and because building weapon rank is much easier in this game than in later games, Jagen is probably the most well-balanced Jagen in the series. While he remains very good throughout much of the game, he isn't nearly the dominant force that later Jagens will be. I would argue that the ideal Jagen is one who can safely absorb damage, reliably weaken enemies to set up kills for weaker characters, and be able to break out the big damage with heavy weaponry to eliminate particularly nasty enemies or bosses to clear room for your other characters to proceed safely. I would also say that if a Jagen should be balanced around having long-term potential, it should be as a utility unit, whether it's as a support bot, stat backpack, or rescue dropper. Fire Emblem is a tactics game, so it's important that players be presented with new and fresh challenges that can't be continuously broken by stupid good units like Seth or Titania. After all, most of the games have added protections to protect players from the possibilities of being RNG screwed with their growth units, whether it's through late-game characters like Gato and Athos, or mid-game killers like Harkin, Pent, and Hawkeye in Blazing Blade. Using the OG Jagen as our basis, we need to identify what makes a Jagen necessary, what makes some Jagens overpowered, what Intelligent Systems has done to nerf or buff Jagens, and what the platonic ideal of a Jagen looks like in practice. I think it's important to identify why Jagens are often necessary to the challenge of Fire Emblem. In order to see why, I think we need to take a look at the two games that lack a Jagen, the prologue of New Mystery of the Emblem and Three Houses. Specifically, we'll be looking at their hardest difficulties, Lunatic and Maddening respectively. New Mystery of the Emblem does have a Jagen, the Paladin Aaron, but he doesn't join until Chapter 1, which only happens after an 8-chapter prologue. For the most part, lacking a Jagen during these chapters is whatever. That is until Prologue 8, where you are immediately confronted by numerous problems. You have reinforcements pouring from the bottom of the map, enemy archers who have overlapping ranges with strong physical units, and Silver Axe fighters that will one-round or one-hit KO most of your cast. To get through this chapter on Lunatic or Lunatic Reverse, you basically need all of the RNG to go your way, and there's almost no room for error. Because Fire Emblem is a series where perfect play can still fuck up because of bad luck with RNG, you desperately need a failsafe to help you out if things go awry. Not having Aaron or Jagen available in this chapter makes it one of the hardest and most frustrating challenges in New Mystery. However, this is just one chapter. A game that much better illustrates the need for a Jagen is Three Houses on Maddening. Early on, most of your units are super squishy, locked to 4 move, and enemies are crazy buff, with all of them needing to be ganged up on by multiple units to be killed. Lacking a Jagen that can run in, kill a couple dudes, especially Poison Strike archers, absorb a few hits, or soften enemies safely makes many of the early chapters either a slog or really frustrating. The Red Canyon battle is super slow as you need to carefully bait out the archers and chunk guys with weak bows and ranged attacks to safely kill them. Or consider the Chapter 5 tower, which is a grueling grind through tons of enemies, ambush spawns with the pass skill, and a brutal final boss. If you don't have Warp or an early recruited Catherine by this point, you're going to get wrecked and wrecked and wrecked some more. It's especially frustrating because the game has a ready-made Jagen in Geralt. He is built to be a beast and perfect for setting up kills for the scrub squad you call a team in Three Houses. Geralt has skills like Blade Breaker that inflict -6 strength and defense on the enemy while simultaneously not having enough speed to double and one-round enemies. This would make him great for weakening enemies so that you don't have to keep poking them from afar and playing slowly. Also, for story reasons, he would have, let's just say, some pretty limited availability. So having a Jagen allows players to play a little more aggressively and a little more dynamically while still providing a safety net. This is also known as fun. Conversely, if a Jagen is too powerful, the game can lose some of its dynamism. Playing through Sacred Stones or Path of Radiance on their hard modes by fully abusing and relying on Seth and Titania is not only easy, but the most effective way to play the game. It's very easy to stomp through these entire games with little other than your Jagens, especially Sacred Stones. So why are these Jagens so overpowered? The obvious answer for Seth and Titania is that their growths are really good, but that doesn't fully account for other broken Jagens like Blazing Blade Marcus. The other two important factors are weapon ranks and class. The idea of a Jagen is that they get surpassed by other units through stats, but this never really happens to Marcus or Seth because of their weapon ranks. Marcus has A rank swords and lances with a B rank in axes. Seth has A ranks in swords and lances. What these ranks mean is that both units have access to basically all weapons in those types, causing their statistical deficiencies, if they ever even appear, to never matter. If their strength is falling behind, give them silver and killer weapons. Trouble doubling? Hand them brave weapons and watch them go ham. Because of how long it takes to build weapon ranks, this means giving Marcus and Seth these resources has basically no opportunity cost. It's unlikely that any character will build up equivalently insane weapon ranks, and even if they do, it'll be towards the end of the game. The result is that Marcus and Seth can control these games' overpowered weapon triangles with the most powerful weapons in the game. This imbalance even applies to some Jagens with bad long-term stats like Shadow Dragon Jagen. His stats are booty for his level, and D swords and B lances don't seem that good until you consider that the only weapon rank that matters in that game is C and A. On Merciless mode, Jagen's base access to Rider's Bane, Javelins, Silver Lance, and easy access to Gradivis late game make him ridiculously overpowered. Even though his stats are trash, he will be able to one-shot most Cavaliers and Paladins with Forged Rider's Bane, making him one of the best long-term units in the game. Shadow Dragon weapon rank builds so slow and enemies hit so hard that it's basically untenable to train weapon rank on the game's scrubs. Even when the games lower the base weapon ranks on Jagens, it doesn't much matter. It sucks that Frederick only has D swords and D axes at base along with his B lances, but he has that from the beginning, and without grinding, no other unit will have weapon ranks and all three weapons as good as Frederick's by endgame. Other than weapon ranks, Jagens are also often in one of the best classes in the series, Paladin. Consider Titania. Because she is a Paladin, she has control over the weapon triangle, access to two great 1-2 range options in javelins and hand axes, higher movement than all other ground units, and the ridiculously broken Canto skill. In Path of Radiance, Canto allows mounted units to move after all actions, including attacking. By being in the most broken class in the game, Titania will always be better than footlocked units like Nephany or even Boyd because she can do hit and run attacks, move wherever she wants, and has great rescue drop utility. And that's all on top of her having the best weapon ranks in the game and controlling the weapon triangle. So that's how Jagens are overpowered and exceed their role as powerful early game crutches. The question then remains, how should a Jagen be balanced to keep the challenge fresh and dynamic while allowing early game strategies to be more explosive and exciting? I looked through all the Jagens in the series to determine the platonic ideal of a Jagen, and some good candidates are Avel and Dagdar in Thracia 776, Marcus in Binding Blade, and Gunter in Conquest. However, the Jagen that I consider the most well-balanced in the series is Soth from Radiant Dawn. Soth is not a typical Jagen, because instead of being a paladin, he is a rogue. Still, compared to the rest of the Dawn Brigade, he is really powerful, with the most reliable 1-2 range and mega bulk, sporting a cool 35 HP alongside a busted 14 defense and 9 resistance. Yet, as the game goes on, Soth basically becomes useless as a combat unit, and the game uses several tricks to make this happen. The first point of balance is his class. As a rogue, he lacks the high movement of characters like Jill, Har, and Titania. This means that late game, he is unable to get ahead of your other units, and he also lacks Canto, which limits his utility in combat long term. The rogue and its promoted class, Whisper, also suffer from really low stat caps, and Radiant Dawn is the only game in the series where stat caps actually can matter. The low strength and defense caps make his damage output and bulk poor in the long run. His low strength cap is also not helped at all by his weapon type. He has B knives, which is good, but knives are the worst weapon type in the game. Soth begins falling off as a combat unit because the low might of knives prevents his attack power from keeping up with powerhouses like Har and Ike, or even less powerful characters like Mia. Because he is a rogue, he does retain some utility as a thief, and he also is a good support bot for Micaiah since they come with a free A support. The fact that Soth falls off the way he does, with limited long-term viability, means that he is, at best, a utility unit late, and this means that the game forces you, at least on normal and hard mode, to diversify your strategies and army as the game goes on. You simply cannot rely on Soth the whole game the way you can with Seth or Titania. We know that Jagens are pretty necessary for early game Fire Emblem to be fun. We don't have to look any further than 3 Houses Maddening for that to be apparent, but they should be balanced to not break the game. If we use Soth as a good base for what a Jagen should be, what strategies balance them most effectively? First off, Jagens should not be in broken classes. Class balance is a whole other can of worms in Fire Emblem that we'll look at another time, but Jagens being Paladins makes them stay broken far longer than intended. Intelligence Systems needs to put Jagens into classes that have inherent limitations like Soth and Avil, being a rogue and a swordmaster respectively. They could try classes such as Sniper or General. Limited weapon control is also an important tactic. Jagens should be locked into classes that prevent them from controlling the weapon triangle or from having basically exclusive access to powerful weapons all game long. Also, finding ways to limit availability can work, as with Avil, Dagdar, and Gunter. Another consideration is skills, since Fire Emblem is so skill heavy now. As great as a skill like Blade Breaker is on Geralt early game, it would be much less useful late game because the meta of 3 houses Maddening becomes one-shotting enemies rather than weakening them for enemy phase. If Geralt were playable, his skill set would balance his usefulness long term. Growth rates also can play into this, but they need to be stupid low to really balance out Jagens. If you look at Conquest Gunter, you see that his stats basically make him useless late game when he returns. However, his skill, Forceful Partner, means that there still is a benefit to using him as a stat backpack for Corrin, but there's a serious offensive opportunity cost that has to be weighed to deploy him for that purpose. And I think that just about covers it. The genesis for this video came from a recent run I've been doing of the Sacred Stones where I had to bench and gimp Seth to have the game be anything resembling a challenge. This, combined with an observation that no matter how much each game changes, certain trends almost always remain the same, made me want to look at how the series handles balance. There are definitely a couple more trends in the series that I would like to analyze, but those will have to wait for another time. I hope you enjoyed the video, and peace out.